Good Saturday morning of the 21st week. This is the same text, okay? It's chapter 1 of the letter to the Corinthians, but now it's 26 to 31, the verses. It's the same theme. You got to remember, Corinth and Athens were not only the centers of commerce, Corinth certainly was, but of wisdom, human wisdom. And it was a true human wisdom. We still are blessed by it. It's the philosophical mind of the West. It gave rise to the philosophy of the West. It got rise to the universities, and the university gave rise to the sciences, the economics. We are blessed by what the Greeks were doing. If you want to understand our civilization, you have to understand it. The Greek wisdom, coupling Jewish, Christian religion, Roman power. It created a civilization. It created a European culture that has truly, with all its flaws within, helped to create the modern world and the postmodern world. That's the truth. Even though it gave rise to monstrosities, it's still the wisdom of the West. And it's still, I think, coupled with it all, is still the genius. The genius of the West is, I think, the hope of the world. I'm strong on that because it recognizes, even though in a flawed manner, human dignity. Yeah, the inviolability of a human person. It's so deeply rooted in the West. It took centuries and aberrations to bring it out, but it has. See? I don't know. I believe in the genius of the West. And I think that's why Christianity married it so tightly, because the vision of Christ and the vision of the Greeks fit together in a manner that brings religion and science and politics, as it were, the human adventure together. It doesn't exclude any element. We're not escapists. We're not trying to run from the world. We seek only to bring the light of the gospel to the world for its enrichment, the enrichment of humanity itself. Maybe it's salvation. Maybe if we listened more to the gospel, we wouldn't have had the 20th century. We wouldn't have had Hitler and Mussolini and Stalin and others. Let me just read this to you, okay? It's the same chapter 26, chapter 1, 26 to 31 in the letter to the Corinthians, first letter. Consider your own calling, brothers and sisters. This I really think a lot of. Not many of you were wise by human standards. I think of myself that way. Not many of you powerful. Not many of you were of noble birth. I'd say that's true of me. Pretty Joe average. That's it. I am Joe average. Rather, God chose the foolish of the world to shame the wise. Think of Christ and the apostles. And think of the time, the wise men of that time. Holy cow, what a time of European evolution in terms of science and wisdom, philosophical genius. Holy Christmas trees. Rather, God chose the foolish of the world to shame the wise. Who are the foolish? The apostles. And they gave rise to Christianity, and Christianity preserved the genius of the Greeks. Without Christianity, Greek genius would not have had a foothold in the emergence of Europe. It was in the cathedrals and the cathedral schools and monasteries that the Greek sciences were retained, the great Greek manuscripts, Plato and Aristotle. And on the basis of that, the European university, the Western university emerged. And out of that, Galileo, Copernicus, the sciences, the wisdom of the West. I remember one of my students was trash-mouthing the monastic tradition. I said, without them, you wouldn't be sitting here. You wouldn't be sitting here. I meant it. Without the monks, there would have been no universities in the West. The universities are monastery schools gone large. They preserved, the monastery preserved the genius of the Greeks, the philosophical genius, and that gave rise to science. The scientific mind. Yeah. One of the things that's so neat about a Catholic university is they study not only the sciences and philosophy, but theology. It's really the wisdom of the West. When I think of why would you go to a Catholic university? And I would say to study the wisdom of the West, not only the sciences and the technologies and all that, but also the theological and philosophical wisdom that undergirds our civilization and our civilized values. Yeah. Watch, let me read the rest of it, then I'll leave you alone. Rather, God chose the foolish of the world to shame the wise. Think of the monks. And God chose the weak of the world to shame the strong. Again, you think of the monks. And think of the monks during the Roman Empire. See? And God chose the lowly and despised of the world, those who count for nothing, to reduce to nothing those who are something, so that no human being might boast before God. Yeah, the role of the church. Yeah. It is due to him that you are in Christ Jesus, who became, see, this is the counterpoint to the wisdom of the West, the wisdom of the Greeks. It is to him that you are in Christ Jesus, who became for us wisdom from God. Christ is the wisdom of God incarnate, as well as who became for us wisdom from God, as well as righteousness, sanctification, and redemption, so that as it is written, whoever boasts should boast in the Lord. That's neat, isn't it? Christianity is the divine wisdom in the flesh, lived out in the life of the church. It's a wisdom. It's not a gimmick. It's not a trade. It's a wisdom. And wisdom is a comprehensive, intuitive view of what is good, true, and beautiful. And to put it another way, who we are before God. That's a wisdom. Who we are, not what we are. Who we are before God. And who God is before us. See? As God illumines us with who he is in Christ. Preached by the church. Right? Preached by the church. Even in her most crude moments of history, in the end, she never betrayed the gospel. She never preached a false gospel. Sinful as the church has been at times in its leadership and on the practical level, she still preached the gospel. Maybe in a very fleshy manner. I think if you go into St. Peter's Cathedral in Rome, the Basilica, the ceilings painted by Michelangelo, phenomenally gorgeous. All right? But those popes were anything but religious guys. They were power brokers. Michelangelo, I understand, didn't have the faith until the end of his life. For him, it was a project. But he has moved the hearts of the faithful for all these centuries as they look at the ceiling and they see the gospel, as it were, in print. They see it in pictorial form, and they are moved by the faith. In the faith and by the faith. Painted at that time, probably by a pagan Michelangelo, for neo-pagan popes. And yet the gospel is preached on the ceiling of St. Peter's. See? There's a great line in the monastery, God saves the world despite the clergy. There's some history to that. Despite the popes and bishops and clergy, God still saves us. He saves us on the walls of the Vatican. And I believe Michelangelo was at that time a non-believer or some form of pagan. He becomes a Christian, I understand, at the end of his life. But he preaches the gospel on the ceiling in a manner that is preserved by pagan and Christian alike, because it is a magnificent portraiture of a redeemed humanity. Sinful, redeemed humanity. Just think of what's on the ceiling. It's the gospel, the Old and New Testament, portrayed magnificently through human artistic genius on the walls by somebody who didn't believe. Isn't that something? I think it makes it a better story if he was a pagan. God writes straight with many a crooked line, especially in matters of the faith.